Yeah, good morning, viewers. I'm just slightly late this morning, and I want to welcome you all once again to this our usual fourth Sunday program, The State of the Nation. I'm your host again today, Clayton Hines, and we will be dealing with this particular topic today. Forbes Burnham, the 7th anniversary of our independence, made a very significant speech, and the foundation thought it wise that today we should bring you that speech because he spoke about elections and a number of other issues in that speech. Unfortunately, the technical aspect of this particular speech by Forbes Burnham, we now are arranging to get it downloaded into the system. So what we will do, I will just try to update you on the activities on the foundation. We kind of continue to have our activities, our engagement with our mentees. We continue to have our meetings of the executive of the foundation. We continue to have our programs. And like everything else, we encourage people who would like to be part of the Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham Foundation. You can contact any one of our members. Vincent Alexander, Chairman. You have yours truly as the PR and communication man for the foundation. You have Mrs. Gall, and my number is 6452156, and Mr. Alexander's number is 624-2057. Yeah. Those are the numbers you can call. Make contact with any one of the executives of the foundation, and we will be able to arrange for you to have a form. Like I said, today's program we will be dealing particularly with this kind of presentation of Forbes Burnham on the 7th anniversary of our independence. In that presentation, he dealt extensively with issues in relation to elections, and the foundation thought that it would be very appropriate for us to bring you that speech. In the meanwhile, while we're having it kind of downloaded and arranging to get into the system so we can bring it to you, we will just play for you some patriotic songs until such time when that is done, and then we bring you the speech of Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham, or the 7th anniversary of our independence.
अरे हमें प्यार में रहने दो, अरे हमें प्यार में रहने दो। रंग के बारे में भूल जाओ, अरे हमें प्यार में रहने दो। Forget about your color and let us live in love. Let us get together and let us live in love. us come together and let us live in love. रंग के बारे में भूल जाओ, अरे हमें प्यार में रहने दो, अरे हमें प्यार में रहने दो, अरे हमें प्यार में रहने दो, अरे हमें प्यार में रहने दो.
This is Dave Martins. Don't move your dial. Don't move. You're at Pepperpot Radio, the best around every day. DJ K-Man and DJ Get Busy. Play the music, brethren.
Everybody sing this song now. We're a peaceful people, struggling with struggle. I mean, I look for trouble, just ask around. But when outside faces, from foreign places, talk about taking over, we ain't backing down. So we ain't giving up no mountain, we ain't giving up no tree, we ain't giving up no river. That belongs to me. Not one blue sake, not one rice grain, not one for us, not a of the open country, of the Rupanuni, and the Essequibo, the time of night. Though we may criticize it, this is the home we love it, and we mean to keep it. We have that right. So we ain't giving up no mountain, and we ain't giving up no tree, and we ain't giving up no river that belongs to we. Not one Lusaki, not one rice bread, not one for us, not a blade of grass, not one golden apple, not one jamun, not a drop of water from the Pomeroon, not one breadfruit, not one whitey, not one guinea, not one lime tree, not one sapodilla, not one Caroline, not one sugar cane, or a dry of lime, not one sherriga, not one cracate, not one guinea, not one blue sake, not one rice bread, not a blade of grass. Whoop, bum, bum, bay. Bum, 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 boy. This land is our land now. We're gonna make it somehow. We will bend like a bow, but never break. Our fathers came here, and they lived and died here, and we're moving from here. Make no mistake. So we ain't giving up the mountain, and we ain't giving up no tree, and we ain't giving up the river that belongs to we. Not the one blue sake, not the one rice bread, not one grass, not a blade of grass. Every time we sing this song to our Guyanese audience, a chorus does break out. And here is your chorus to break out. All your turn to sing. You don't come here to sit down and listen, you come here to sing. 1, 2, 1, 2. No, we ain't giving up no mountain. And we ain't giving up. All right. We ain't giving up no river that belongs to we. Not the one blue sake, not the one rice bread, not one for us. One more time. Not a blade of grass. Let me hear you. No, we ain't giving up no mountain. Yes. No, we ain't giving up no tree. We ain't giving up the river that belongs to we. Not the one blue sake. No, we ain't giving up no mountain. No, we ain't giving up no tree. We ain't giving up no river that belongs to we. Not one blue sake, not one rice bread, not one grass, not a blade of grass. We have come to almost to the end. We have one more song to do, and I just want to tell you briefly that this song is a song that came out of a fete we played in New York about 3 years ago. Maybe some of you were there, I don't know. But it was a night when it was a magic night. It was a Guyana night, and people were nostalgic about Guyana. And I was moved by it, and went back to Cayman and wrote a song. We come across the Caribbean Sea, mother, father, picnic, and we settled down in GT. Why ho? We sat down in the pouring rain, in the hot sun and the sugar cane, and we planted the rice and cane. Why ho? Yes, we take off the boots and we put on the roots. Why ho? So remember the crabwood that grow in Essequibo is we own. And the 6 o'clock bee and the sake rinky is we own. And the lava that run from the Viacon is we own. And the Wallaba post on the Quarantine coast is we own. I had the Bundary crab is we own. Truly Benab is we own. Human Ayana is we own. Fry Corilla is we own. Arapaima is we own. Human Ayana is we own. Whether Grove or whether Pleasance, we know the Pagua and Confidence, and we know how to wine and prance. Why oh, and we celebrate Diwali, and when it's time for Mashramani, it's party, party, party. Why oh, yes, we know how to fet till we underwear wet. Why oh, as the crabwood that grow in Essequibo is we own. And the 6 o'clock bee and the sake rinky is we own. And the lava that run from the Viacon is we own. And them all of a post on the Quarantine coast is we own. Partner Penus is we own. 5 Finger Juice is we own. Human Ayana is we own. The Simatu Vine is we own. And the Masquerade wine is we own. Human Ayana is we own. Listen to me, chip, sugar cake, and saltfish and bake is we own. Mutton curry and 2 pearl is we own. Or be a nice black pudding and rice is we own. Coconut metachi and wiri wiri is we own. Babu Lala rich and with the quota in the hand is we own. Alexander Willie and the blue dashiki is we own. Frankie Muniz and the boom boom cheese is we own. And the fella in tongue namely Funky Fong is we own. And the fellas in the tree watching cricket for free is we own. And the brother in the night preaching Jordan night is we own. And Mary and Paul up on the sea wall is we own.
faithful who guard Guyana's lands, who find the shock of blooming bitterhood violet around, who cherish and defend forever the state that gave them birth. We'll forge a nation's mighty soul, construct a nation's frame, freedom or everlasting goal, courage and truth for aim, unyielding in our quest for peace, like ancient heroes brave, who strive and never cease with strength beyond the slave. Guyana, climb the glorious perch to fame, prosperity. Join in the universal search for worldwide community. Your people, whatsoever breed, let hue or quality, with one firm never changing good, the nation's unity.
Comrades, fellow Guyanese, today begins the 8th year of Guyana's independence. We have ended the first 7 years of our life as an independent state. 7 years of creation, 7 years of nation building, 7 years of peace, 7 years of progress, 7 years of growing up. For most of us, it hardly seems as long as that. For years that are not marred by crisis and strife, but filled instead with honest labor and improving living standards, flit quickly by. Today is a good time to reflect on our achievements and our successes, and to draw lessons from our mistakes. It is also a good time to look ahead into the future. And it is about this future that I should like to share with you my thoughts this morning. The future of our nation, the future of our parliamentary democracy. Over the last several months, I've had to be giving thought to the holding of our next general election. As you all know, our Constitution requires that that election be held not later than the 31st of March 1974. I have had to consider, therefore, whether it was in Guyana's interest that we should wait until then, or nearly then, or whether we should give the people of Guyana an opportunity, even before that, to express their view on the government they wish to guide the destinies of the nation for the next 5 years. Such a decision is never easy for a Prime Minister, and the considerations that go into it are never confined to questions of party political advantage. The interests of the nation are the major consideration. In our case, for example, it would have been quite wrong to have held a general election in the last months of 1972, as many had urged upon me, in the glow of the great national successes that marked the holding of the meeting of foreign ministers of non-aligned countries in August and of Carifesta in September 1972. In my view, it would have been wrong, because we were still working on the second development plan, and it would hardly have served the national interest to have interrupted that work and gone to an election without giving you, the people of Guyana, an opportunity to express your judgment in full knowledge of the programs which this government contemplates for the period ahead. Likewise, it would have been wrong to have held the election, as some had argued, in the early months of 1973, when we were in the midst of important discussions with our Caribbean colleagues on the future of the region. Such a course could have created uncertainties at a critical stage in those discussions, to the possible detriment of the interests both of Guyana and of the region. All these matters I have had to bear in mind as I pondered the date of the next election. But there are other matters also of which I had to take account. Our national constitution gives the franchise to every one of our citizens, whether residing in Guyana or beyond the shores of Guyana. This has meant that in our first national election after independence, we had to cater for the new situation of an overseas vote. On the last occasion, there were some irregularities in the initial compilation of the overseas register. I myself brought this matter to the public on 3 separate occasions in 1968. In Parliament on the 31st of October, and in public statements on the 12th of November and the 10th of December. As early as the 31st of October in Parliament, I referred to attempts that were being made, and I quote, to include in the lists the names of persons not entitled to be registered, and the fact that they were so devised as to conceal the identity of the persons or interests on whose behalf these registrations were secured. End of quote. I assured the public then that the arrangements for overseas voting would provide safeguards against irregularities of this kind. Again, on November the 12th, I indicated to the public that the checking of the lists by the Chief Elections Officer had indicated that, again I quote, to the already heavy burden of the initial registration of an essentially migrant community residing in a foreign environment were added the special problems of deliberate attempts on the part of unscrupulous persons to secure improper registration. End of quote. I explained that these irregularities were apparently organized in the expectation that overseas voting would have been conducted through the use of a system similar to the proxy system, and I assured the country that these expectations would be frustrated by the arrangements actually provided for in the elections regulations. Incidentally, it may be of statistical interest to note that in 1968 there were 68,588 registered overseas voters, of whom 36,745 exercised the franchise. On March 6th of this year, the Minister of Home Affairs made a statement in the National Assembly from which it was clear that the 1968 Overseas Register was being scrapped and that an entirely new register was being prepared under arrangements which would ensure, particularly in the light of past experience, the avoidance of irregularities from the very beginning. It is from this new register that the lists of overseas voters will now be produced. Although this has meant expenditure that we would have preferred to avoid, and an increase in the workload at a time when our missions are particularly stretched, I was convinced that it was not less than our duty that we should have undertaken an entirely new registration overseas. There is another matter that has been made the subject of comment by the political opposition. It is that of proxies. Voting by proxy has been a feature of elections in Guyana as far back as can be recalled. Certainly, it has been a feature of the electoral system ever since 1953, when universal adult suffrage was introduced for the first time. No government since has ever considered it either necessary or desirable to abolish proxy voting. It was, for example, a feature of the electoral provisions governing the 1961 elections. Now it is clear that at the 1968 elections there was a large number of persons applying to vote by proxy. I have no wish to enter this morning into a sterile, acrimonious debate about this matter. It is enough for present purposes for me to take account of the statement in the report of the Elections Commissioner on the conduct of the 1968 elections that applications were received for an unusually large number of proxies from all, I repeat, all political parties, and that this imposed an enormous strain on the electoral machine. It is important to the vitality of our parliamentary system that we should remove from it all possibilities of breakdown or even of suspicion. But in doing so, we must at the same time protect the rights of all our citizens. The opposition has called for the abolition of proxy voting. I cannot agree that it should be abolished altogether. It is of special importance to that class of persons who find it impossible, because of the nature of their occupation or otherwise, to cast their votes in person. Members of the security forces, employees in the transport services, candidates themselves, election officers, the blind and the infirm, all these, for example, have always had the right to appoint someone close and trusted to cast their ballots for them. I cannot agree that they should be deprived of this right, and the present arrangements must therefore continue to apply to them at least. In 1968, the number of electors for whom any one individual could vote as proxy was increased from 2 to 3. I propose that we should return to the former ceiling of 2. In 1968, the category of persons for whom voting by proxy was available was extended so as to include anyone who, for any good cause, is likely to find it impracticable or seriously inconvenient to go to the polling place at which he or she is entitled to vote. While owing a responsibility to make adequate arrangements for those persons for whom insistence on personal voting would create a hardship and perhaps deprive them of the franchise, it is proposed to restrict proxy voting to the categories I have specifically mentioned, namely members of the security forces, employees in the transport services, candidates and election officers, and the blind and infirm. When these modifications are made, the arrangements for proxy voting would be identical with those in force for the 1961 elections, and therefore on the terms that were approved on that occasion by the principal opposition party then in the government. Beyond this, however, and particularly with a view to easing the burden of which the Commissioner of Elections complained in his last report, and to make the arrangements for voting otherwise than in person even more secure, I am prepared to recommend to Parliament the adoption of the system of postal voting, which will be available as an alternative to any person hitherto entitled to vote by proxy, but who would cease to be so entitled at the next election. This is a well-known system which is widely used throughout the Commonwealth, and the provisions we intend to introduce will in all their essential respects be identical with those in force in the United Kingdom. In essence, they will allow the voter who cannot for good and satisfactory reason cast his ballot in person to do so by posting it to the Commissioner of Elections rather than using the intermediary of a proxy. It has to commend it both the maintenance of the secrecy of the ballot and the avoidance of irregularities. I hope that these new arrangements will go a long way toward meeting all legitimate complaints and towards perfecting our electoral system. But beyond the area of complaint, it has been necessary for us to examine all matters relating to our system of parliamentary democracy, to determine in what ways, relevant to the needs of our society, they might be generally improved. The most important of these is the voting age. Some time ago, I indicated that the government had decided to reduce the age of majority. My government does not see the voting age in a context divorced from that of majority generally. Indeed, it would be strange if we should entrust so major a responsibility as the franchise to a citizen while denying him other rights, such as the right to enter into contracts. We see this question, therefore, essentially in the context of the age at which, under our legal system, a citizen attains the age of majority. At the moment, that age is 21, But we are convinced that the time has come to reduce it to 18, and the government intends shortly to introduce legislation to give effect to this. One of the features of this legislation will be an amendment of the Constitution to reduce the voting age to 18 and to reduce likewise the qualifying age for membership of the National Assembly to 18. These constitutional amendments will have effect immediately after passed. The general provisions reducing the age of majority to 18 will also be enacted now. But before they can become operative, a wide range of existing legislation needs to be examined and expressly modified. In order not to delay unduly this process while Parliament is dissolved, provision will be made for these changes to be effected by executive orders made by the President, which orders will be published in due course. As I said before, the constitutional amendments will have to take effect immediately. There is no question, therefore, of the deferment of this important change until after the next general election. For that election, all our citizens of 18 years and over on the qualifying date, whether at home or overseas, will be entitled to cast their vote and determine the party to which they wish to entrust the government of Guyana over the next 5 years. We are confident that the young people of Guyana, who are already playing such a vital role in the processes of nation building, have demonstrated that measure of civic consciousness and national responsibility on which the right to the franchise ought properly to be founded. I am proud that it should have fallen to my government to have made this important change in our legal system. These are some of the matters on which the government has had to take decisions before I could consider advising the President on the dissolution of Parliament and the date of the next general election. That decision, however, is now possible. It is my intention to advise His Excellency the President that the National Assembly should be dissolved on the 6th of June 1973 and that the next general election, the second after independence, should be held on Monday the 16th of July 1973. There still remains, however, much to be done in the time between now and then. On Monday next, for instance, there will be introduced in the National Assembly a bill to give effect to the proposals I have outlined, including the proposal for constitutional amendment to reduce the voting age and the qualifying age for membership of Parliament to 18 years. I hope that I can count on the support of all parties in Parliament for all these measures, and that the government's enlightened proposals will be matched by a corresponding spirit of cooperation on the other side, so that whatever may be the issues in the campaign ahead, we shall start from a common basis of accord on these essentially national matters. I wish you a pleasant and peaceful day, and may God bless you.
Yeah, there you had it. We were able to get a part of that presentation from Lyndon Forbes, Samson Burnham, the 7th anniversary of our independence, in next election that was held in 1973. With that, we come to the end of this program, and I want to thank those of you that have been with us over the period that we have been playing some national songs. We have been able to do some give you some updates into what our programs have been. And of course, we are able to bring you that presentation by Lyndon Forbes, Samson Burnham, at the 7th Independence Anniversary on issues that had to do with elections, and may you have realized that it was the introduction of the reduction of the voting age as a significant kind of measure that he introduced subsequent to that kind of presentation. I want to thank those of you who have been with us, and from now on, until I see you again on the 4th Sunday in the month of June.